Ich sage mal erst dann, wir werden diese Diskussion auf Englisch halten und ich bitte Sie auch, Ihre Fragen später auf Englisch an ihn zu richten. Er fühlt sich noch nicht so ganz zu Hause in seinem Deutsch. Es ist wahrscheinlich bei weitem gut genug, um auch die Fragen zu beantworten. Er bittet aber darum, dass das auf Englisch passiert. I understand, right? So we'll conduct the whole thing in English. Welcome. I don't have to introduce Juan. He's the reason why you're here in the first place. So he doesn't need an introduction. My name is Eike Gebhardt. And we'll have a brief, question and answer ping pong game. And after a short while, we'll open it to the floor, to the audience. Whatever questions you may have, whatever polemics and controversies, whatever, you're welcome to join in and direct everything to him. I'm just the mediator here. Juan, when I first saw your paintings, forgive me the association, but you're one of the rare cases that is, as an artist, also an intellectual that reflects on his art and even the presuppositions of the art. You reminded me, forgive the comparison, of a German philosopher. Most people aren't crazy about him and fond of him, named Hegel. There's a famous anecdote about Hegel. At the end of his life, a student came up to him and said, Mr. Hegel, I can't begin to tell you how I admire you. Your formidable system covering every nook and cranny of the universe. Everything from politics, economics, to art, aesthetics, everything. There's just one problem I have with it. Your system is not in accordance with reality. And Hegel is supposed to have answered, scratching his head, it's too bad for reality. See, and that's what you remind me of, in a sense. But to get into your work right away, starting with a simple question, I gathered from your vita, or from your confessions, that you felt immediately very at ease and at home in Berlin. That surprised me, even a certain harmony with your own past. A good friend of mine, Jean-Hubert, who was a curator of the Pompidou, once came to New York, and the New Yorkers asked him, said, Mr. Martin, we are impressed that you are here, but we actually admire French culture, its sense of identity. And he interrupted them and said, what I'm here for is not any identity. I admire New York for your permanent identity crisis. And in a sense, that is Berlin. Berlin is a city, as they say, it'll be a nice place to live if they ever finish it. It's a permanent crisis of self-conception, of identity. Is that what attracts you and reminded you of Cuba, which in a sense is a surreal country to begin with?
Yeah, my first time when I came into Berlin was in the 90s. It was 97 actually. We still have, it was an on construction, everything was set up. One country disappear, another take place. So that was interesting to me in the first time. So when I went there, I was in several places and I was wondering that Berlin was a place where the past and the future have a role, visible.
Now that you have to explain.
Yeah, and there were 3 cases. Once I went to Potsdamer Platz, and there was obviously the present take the past and building something projecting to the future. It was in 97.
Okay, that was right. Still at that time was really a depressing place.
Exactly. And then I went to the more to the east, more to the Mitte areas, and I was impressed because it was exactly the way I see Havana when I left. So totally destroyed, totally free, totally, and it's this kind of spirit that make me think actually. And once what Cuba just changed, it will be probably like that. So it was interesting also because I met also a lot of people that were not so, in a way, international. There were a lot of people from the East, and I have this kind of a discussion with them. So I was, and I find out really funny because I find that a lot of content, or let's say cultural content, from these people belong also to me. So we're talking about the same aspect of life, like daily life, like from cinema to cartoons to chairs, products. So we have that in Cuba too. So for me it was familiar and totally familiar to have to discovering that in a place that I never thought that would be so close to my past, to my biography. So it fit with my biography. My idea was to go to Spain because apparently I have the language obviously is the element who joined us. I thought that Spain was my place, but I found that Berlin was so much close to me than Spain, because especially for a contemporary Cuban person like me, the past with Spain, it was too far in time, so we were a colony. So, but with the present, socialists and the whole theatrality of ideology frame, also the aim to look for a space. I find that these people so perturbed and so confused in this time, what's gonna be with our country? So disappear, but we still have an amount of remembrance, an amount of even objects that belong to this country. And I have this idea of that damn, this is something really real, a real country with everything, with all the aspects, with daily life, with objects. There's gonna be disappear, and that was very interesting for me. So how memory and in the way memory and resistance, if it have a friction, and I was there, and I was really happy to be present on that, and that would make me actually to come to Berlin and stay here, and I don't regret.
Welcome.
I got everything for what I have.
Well, we cordially welcome you here and warmly welcome you here.
Yeah.
When you speak of resistance, it's a side aspect of your art actually. Resistance against what? Because, you see posters all over Havana and all over Cuba saying, for the revolution or death, and all these kind of...
Yeah.
Is it resistance against the big brother in the north, United States, or is it resistance against the internal government of Cuba? Wow. What kind of resistance? Against the repression, against the censorship?
Well, exactly here you mean?
No, in Cuba, first of all, because you mentioned it in relation to Cuba. And here, of course, it's an everyday individual resistance against the state of affairs, the status quo. Is that the analogy you're trying to draw?
No, not exactly. I think it's different because we're still under this... in Cuba, what happened now is the presence of the disappear the how could I say, the spirit of the state. So now we are in a situation which has become more and more like a surviving environment. So because the characteristics of the Cuban people and the logic of surviving is more strong than other aspect of life, or of when I mean other aspect of life in terms of political body. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of a dismemberation of this political body. Cuba is not political anymore. It's lost this
priority of survival.
Exactly, yeah. It lost this common language, which is stays based off. So that was the moment when I stayed was in this special period. Mm-hmm. Where there was not even food. There was when the whole East falls, or Cold War was not anymore a pretext to fight against that. In this confusion, I live, and then I come to Germany, and I find what is going to be happening in the future to Cuba, a kind of a reinstallation of these.
Of your familiar scenery, right? Of
exactly.
your everyday scenery.
And that was interesting for me in this.
Well, I can understand
Yeah.
the kind of affinity that you feel
Exactly.
here. Now, getting into your work, not only does it remind many people, obviously, of a certain European tradition, surrealism in a sense, let me get away with that for a second, but not only your work is surreal, the title of the entire show is too. I think you owe us an explanation. What does it mean the future is a place? Utopia, if you forgive me the term, it occurs later on in various of your texts. Utopia means both a beautiful place, but it also means no place, right? Because it doesn't belong anywhere, it's not been realized any place. What do you mean with a title, mysterious title like The Future Was a Place, not to mention the past form in the title?
Right. Yeah, the title of exhibition is a dichotomy implicit inside. I think utopical thinking always was a way of people programming, so
transcending their everyday life.
Exactly. But but for me, like being in it has been always a society who projecting utopical thinking, which is belong to, like say, society. As a society, we're gonna be something better than this. So it was have been the future. Always has been a moment, a place where we have to reach. This is also happening in the Christianity. So paradise, or the idea of paradise, is also an utopical thinking. It's a place.
Exactly.
It's a way of.
You look backward from the anticipated future in paradise.
So, and then it's a game between this idea of projecting something into the future, like a place, and paradoxically, me living what is going to be the future. In my case, they always teach me that we're going to be the future of the humanity. We're going to be communists, the special socialists. We was in this phase, no communists. We didn't reach communists because communism was like paradise.
The end of history.
Yeah, was in the beginning. So I consider myself that we come. Probably I just leave this place, the future, because we were the future. They teach me we were in the school that this society is the future of humankind. Otherwise, we will not survive as human beings. I was like, wow. So, future was a place for me. So, I'm coming from the future, guys.
Okay.
And it's not as good as you think.
Tell us about the future.
So in that moment when I working and back forward, so I understand that probably we have to redefine what is really that place. So the future was a place for me. So
that's not going to happen unless we make it happen.
Yeah, and this paradox is what I want to somehow present with some other elements which are also present in my work. So,
well, let me nag you a little bit.
Yeah.
Do I have to imagine the future where staircases are leading no place and they're starting no place, or houses are suspended in the middle space, and a life without a background, and a foreground?
Yeah.
I feel a little disoriented. Is that the future?
No. I think in my case, I'm working with a very. My work is almost. I'm coming from the Cuban school, which were very, very incisive. Was for our teacher. It was very important that we understand the process as the art of making art. It was not like a relief. It was not like a kind of inspiration in the way that the classic of the romantic way. So it was a process, an investigation.
The permanent revolution.
Exactly. And in that case, I was very interested in how propaganda works. Of course, was one of my how propaganda is doing this fast and strange communication. It was so vigorous and so straight-ahead, which I know was really and still exciting, because propaganda also become publicity also. So how it worked, let's say, as a language. So
And that's a brainwash?
yeah, it could be. Yeah, definitely. We are under these,
Because
this
the propaganda,
image.
if you have no alternatives,
Right.
and it's, the primary issue of any kind of peace, the term dictatorship, let's call Cuba a form of authoritarian dictatorship or whatever, is of course interested in propaganda in the sense that it presents a perceptual filter, the way we're supposed to see the world, and without alternatives. If you see alternatives, then you give the decision-making capacity back to the population. If you have no alternatives, you might as well follow the course the government prescribed.
Yeah, exactly.
So propaganda is obviously, and its main interest is not to appear as propaganda, but as a state of nature.
Yeah, exactly. There's one thing which is very characteristic is the artificiality of the language, the extreme sense of how you say when you reduce
Synthesize?
the extreme synthetic
You make a synthesis
of the language.
out of it.
No, propaganda itself have this characteristic. They always work with the question and the answer in the same, let's say,
Framework, exactly.
Right. So a future was something which was represented by the sound, and the new man is represented by 2 or 3 kids very happy because of the sound. This kind of mystery was really thrilling me, and that made me really looking how these mechanisms work. And I find that also a lot of avant-garde movement, the base is work in this mechanism of friction, contrast, imaginary, and produce a kind of lecture. And back to the lecture, we go then to the language. So our capacity to read anyway a situation. So it's not the same when we are here, we're talking, this is live, no? We are here and then we're talking there's a logic in the room. People are listening.
Don't
and
exaggerate.
we are talking. But if I'm coming now and I put like, I don't know, a picture of a monkey here, there's something happened there, and no matter what, no matter in what situation, you're gonna start to read something out of that. This friction of this breaking this temporality on reality is something which really threw me and make me curious. And that's why you see most of the time my paintings, this kind of friction of object, which doesn't make sense, but still you have a lecture. You cannot really avoid a lecture. You cannot really go, and because it's human, and this kind of necessity of make sense of things is what making the nonsense, or the nonsense as a language, and that's what make surrealism a very, very strong lecture
Impulse,
of reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I would be very careful saying it makes no sense or nonsense or whatever. I mean, there's a classic aesthetic theory going back, into the 18th century, Kant, Baumgarten, all these guys, where he said, well, reality is a certain composition of elements. And we grew up with the illusion that this is a natural composition. Things belong together the way we experience them.
Exactly.
And the artist's task was, there's a beautiful German word that unfortunately the English language doesn't know. It's called hinterfragen. The artist went a layer behind it and said, hey, the principle of composition of the status quo, of the life in which we live, reality as a composition, that's completely artificial. It's one way of doing things, and the artist was, so to speak, a midwife of an alternative reality, gave birth to a vision, not the way things are, that was the old mimetic art, but the way things could be. the
Right.
potential inherent in
Exactly,
reality,
yeah.
recomposing the elements, decomposing them, and recomposing them. And your work reminds me very much of that classic aesthetics.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's also it is very important to see that what I'm trying to get is layers of a cosmogony which is made out of these friction between elements that apparently have no relation. So, and that is contribute somehow. I create his some energy, his energy. We'll look a little bit more at
Well, what you call
religious. It's like I'm calling it's a language itself. It's creating a language which will be provocate a lecture somehow. You know, it's like
it's
Sandy,
multiple
puedes ir
languages.
pasando un poco. No, la de las referencias. I want to share there because it's very, very interesting. So there's the first one? Yeah. Right. So here you see all things that they are somehow I took in from memory books, from Pasa. And there is some kind of photos that they are inspiring sometimes. Pasa, ¿sí? Otra. Pasa hacia abajo. Esa. Let's say this is a small, very, very simple experiment of what happened in my painting. So you see a group of people and nothing really actually happened. The lecture is more is realistic. The context is natural. So it's a group of persons. Pon la otra. No, de arriba. There's one. Otra. There. No. So books. No está. Hay una que está cortada la imagen esa con otra imagen. ¿No? No. Yeah. Well, so. Okay. That's la otra. So there. I didn't say anything now. I just look at this. The same image, just manipulate just a little bit in a very simple way, and that more or less is a graphic way of showing what happened in my painting as create this language, this meta language, let's say, in a way, if it's about, because it's about the language. This meta-linguistic friction what happened there is happening always in my paintings. This is exciting. Enseña la otra, ¿puede? Yeah. Qué pena que no están una detrás de otra. Yeah. So that's it. This is a simple example of what more or less happened in my case. For me, my work is to choose the real, and that is the way the propagandas work. For me, the really, really important is which image I'm gonna put together or not. So the discrimination of the image is what me as a painter actually is doing. So this is the more or less the way is
your
the composition. My approach to this. Gracias.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I think before, I'm full of questions, of course,
right,
because I find your work fascinating. But I think we're going to open it up to the audience. If there are any questions, please feel free, raise your hands. And don't be shy about your English or... you probably could address the question also in German. He would understand. He's just not comfortable in answering in German. Not everyone at the same time. No.
So
let me continue.
Yeah.
You know, obviously, what you call always, I get a kick out of you repeating the term resistance. You're obviously a rebellious spirit. You refuse to accept things the way they are. And that's very honorable, probably not in a state in which you grew up, but it is an honorable issue because you're constantly concerned about the way, as I said, the way reality could be. And you're bored by the fact that it is a certain way that you can experience every day. Everybody talks that way, everybody can describe it. You used a very interesting term right now, the meta-language, and that's exactly what the German word hinterfragen means.
Okay.
The language behind the languages,
You're
what
right.
is actually the message
or the language
or the
about
framework.
language. Yeah.
Exactly. Now, I mentioned that, you know, in the very beginning, that you're obviously one of the few intellectual, forgive me the term, intellectual artist. You mention a lot of terms, you know, that would normally never occur in an artist's biography. Intellectuals, literati, you know, people from Gramsci,
And especially in
whatever.
the painter. So
Exactly. So you obviously reflect the process of art. Do you consider that a precondition of an artist that really doesn't want to just produce pretty images or even critical images, but has to constantly reflect on what he or she is doing? Because if not, that's the actual definition of art. If not, you're not producing art, you're just producing a vision. And there's a famous German president or chancellor that once said, if you have visions, go see a doctor. Now, visions are a dead end. You have a vision and you want to realize it.
yeah.
But you refuse to have a dead end utopia,
right.
right? A utopia that has a certain state predefined with certain formulas how it should be, but you want to keep it in motion, in the process. Who are the intellectual influences that you can most identify with?
I have many of this, but there's
Give us
two.
a sample.
I have a lot of influence from, especially from literature, but let's say painters that are really on the formal way that was more interesting in artists like Chirico. Chirico. Because the way the compositions are really interesting, especially the way he treats the background and the figure, and the way that the lines of your eye just going and trick you in an arc or in a really absurd way of deepness, and that was really interesting. And he's actually one of my heroes in that in the analytic way of art, or let's say as an artist, as an intellectual. Magritte, René Magritte is one of my, but not only the paintings, which were fabulous, because actually it was kind of an archaic way, because he was actually a realistic painter.
Well, that's what surrealism means,
but
hyper-realism.
Yeah, but he have a really strong critic implicit in his art, which was very interesting. And he talked not about painting as a surface, but painting as a methodology of criticize reality. So that was interesting for me. So Magritte, let's say, was the first conceptual artist ever, and one of the most deep inside of linguistic. So was the first artist that I see as a philosopher also, and these are basically one of my two references. There's also Malevich, and of course, in the ways that being a radical artist, the way he was, the way and that make me really think the functions. You as an artist, what is the function of the artist? Is a critic to the reality. or to the language that you use to represent or describe reality. That for me is the function of being an artist, and that's what I try to let's say present as the thesis. For me, the process of create is like a scientific approach to something, to a subject, to try to prove that this is something which is could be a narrative for the future. So, and there has not been so much change formally from Magritte time to today. The only change is the medium that you reproduce. Hyperrealism is something which is made, or realism is something which is reproduced by the, I don't know, computer generate realities. You know, this is hyperrealism. So what is changed is the medium, but not really the content. So that's one thing I realized. And the persistence also of realism in art is something which is really attract me. This question, why realism is so successful as a form, that no other forms like very advanced, probably the most advanced forms of art is abstraction. But why abstraction is not so successful like hyperrealism or realism? Realism is what you have in the computers games, you know. This is realism. This is exactly the same idea which is coming from Da Vinci, you know, from the first idea of people who try to represent reality. This is a big question. It's a big human question which is still on the spot. Change the medium, but not the idea. This is the same. This idea is present in Golem, in big mythologies, or the creation of the first man. God creates something out of his image, so he was the first hyper-realistic, so he created us. So this idea is always there. So, and this is one of my big questions, why we are so obsessed with reality, with the representation of reality. With the representation of reality. This is something which make me also present in my paintings this form which are more or less familiar, like a house, a tree. So this is also one of my big questions on the process that I make this.
There's a formulation that I love by one of my favorite cultural historians, Egon Friedel, who once spoke of a superstition in reality. Belief in reality is a superstition, he said. That's a beautiful formulation. And I also remember I lived in New York during the classic days of the abstract expressionists, and many of them that I talked to said abstraction is only a circuitous road back to concreteness, to figurative painting. It is a necessity, a temporary necessity, to decompose the coercive character of reality. Or if you want to put it that way, a dictatorial character of reality. We are supposed to be realistic. Think of Freud, right? The reality principle, that's maturity, adjust to reality as it is.
It's an obsession. It's an obsession.
One
of the biggest exhibitions in Berlin, the most successful and public-wise, was this exhibition from this British artist. Somebody remember the name? This hyper-realistic artist that reproduced human bodies and
Bacon?
No. It was hyper-realistic. So, and I was
Lucian Freud.
No, it was a very contemporary one. So it's, don't remember now the name. But the fact, the most important thing is, like, I was really wondering how people was so.
You're not talking about Hearst.
No.
He's certainly not a hyper-realist.
No, but it's an obsession. But there is a chance of, I think art also have a function in this system of representation, which is what I call it the counter-revolutions.
That's a term you have to decode for the audience.
Yeah,
can
I like to
counter-revolution.
think that there's one thing that the artist can work in it is in these, because we admit that reality is something that a political or philosophical body generate, and we apply to that. So, like society somehow working that way, that there's programming somehow a body that we are living in it. So, art is also have a place in this idea of society.
We wish.
Real, but there is a place which is no programming, which is, I don't know if you see in video games, sometimes you see that there's a door which is just programming to be a door, but you cannot open. It's just like the programmer just consider this place not interesting for the game. So I think art could have these functions of create this space that there are no programming. There are no programming, and I think in that sense, is what happened the counter-revolution. We are these people who try to live or to act in this no programming system, what the big programmers did for us to be happy. So I think all the greatest artists and all the great arts is always have been working in this area, which is no programming, still no programming.
We need a program to deprogram us, right?
Exactly. And in that case, and that's what I refer when we are this resistance, but not as a fighter, not as a commentator, because sometimes some form of art represent these kind of mainstream compositions that we are like criticizing, saying that they are already, the system already know that we're gonna be they're gonna criticize this in that way. And in this sense, you are also working for this system. You are part of the program. It's sad, but it's like that. When you criticize the situation in Mexico within the border, that you're already in the program. This is not really
exactly. You're reacting to preset terms.
Yeah, exactly. They can see the way, because it's already the way of the response is already programming too. So it's really rare when an artist really touch something which is no programming, which they say. And I think the real art in this area, in the most obscure, unprogramming places, this is the real resistance. The others is just activists, which is already, they know the way they're gonna deal with that. So big artists always touch these areas, the unprogramming area, the area they cannot private, they cannot advance an answer to you. So many artists also are like a situationist.
Exactly.
Guide the board, big areas, they touching areas that they never, and that's why they was also so unsuccessful. And so big artists also are marked a little bit by this kind of being damaged somehow. So I think Gray Bacon, one of the others biggest fighters in this fight of it. I think art is in the language, not in an activist. Activist is something else. But we are working in this big fight, which is is a fight for the language who are the programmers have in the hand. So
and we have to break the
code. Exactly. I can break the codes, not coders. That can be okay. And that is also is something which is moving, something which I believe artists functions. It doesn't matter if you work in video or this. These are the mediums. Or this is what I think. So,
let me repeat the offer to the audience. Any questions? No questions. It's also evident. It's also obvious, self-explanatory.
It's not. I'm totally confused.
It's a compliment to you. How lucidly you've been explaining your work.
So if you can, and sorry, maybe I'm, but there's a very common question always. What do you mean with this painting, with this or that? I'm not working with one idea. I not work with many
We hope
ideas.
not,
I work basically with a cosmology, with a system of ideas. But actually, basically, I work with in one big idea. And so in this idea, I try to put all my paintings in this kind of discourse. No, we to call it in
But
philosophy.
you mentioned the term content appeared before, and you said actually the function of the artist is to break the preconditioning frame of mind, the fixed frame of mind. I can imagine, a little like the seven dwarfs constantly hammering away at the fixed walls of, being walled in our mind. But looking at your paintings, for instance, they are concrete sceneries.
Yeah.
Now, you bracketed out the kind of social political aspect. That's not the primary concern of the artist, you said. Nevertheless, there's an old saying of the 68ers saying the private aspects are always also political aspects.
Yeah.
Do you think, let me use a cautious formulation, that the task of the artist is to create alternative stage settings, so to speak, for that kind of utopia that you are trying to sketch?
Yeah, absolutely.
And how would you describe, let's take the one with the stairway there, give us a brief explanation how that is a stage setting.
Yeah,
I find that a beautiful metaphor for the theater.
I obviously working with with elements that are visible, you can recognize. So that make me probably a painter. So I did work with I do work with this let's say element, because first of all, as a painter, I have to have a body, a concrete, imaginary, to present my ideas the way I want. So and my paintings are totally a reflex of this complexity of this, let's say, system that I create by myself about reality. So about reading reality. So there are specific ideas, but they are not really going to a specific, let's say, lecture. It's the density. What I'm interested in is the density of the painting itself. It's this density of reality, which is reality. The reality have a density. Otherwise, it's not real. It's just. I try to get this representation of my ideas in this density of the time, ideology, dreams, or I don't know, private things, private ideas or biographies, things that I read in history or in the past and in the present. So it's everything contained in one image, and that's just basically what I'm trying to say, which is not really it's not necessarily one thing that I mean this and that in this painting or this. It's a circuit of idea who's going round on my work. So it's one big idea, one big investigation on me as an artist, as a person actually, as an artist, to discovering what it's about. Now, reality. Yeah.
That's fascinating to me, certainly, because it stands in direct opposition, resistance, you would say, to, let's say, modern design theory, which works with exactly the opposite ideal, namely leaving as much empty spaces. They call it euphemistically space of potentialities, because there's nothing. But it's the same idea, purity, which was for a long time an ideal of character. Purity is not a quality, purity is the absence of a quality. It's nothing yet, right? And by the same token, that's why I was fascinated by the term density. I'm an old creativity researcher and even have written books about it or whatever. If there's one thing you can say about creative people, They thrive in what researchers call an enriched environment.
Right.
A dense environment in your terms, with lots of impulses, and lots of impulses give
Right.
you lots of possibility, not an empty space. An empty space always means that you have a rich
Yeah, but
inside, which most people don't have. You
Exactly.
need impulses to trigger you.
It's interesting what you say, because actually design and propaganda is working at the same time. Is the opposite of density. Is the
simplicity,
the simplicity,
the
which is
plainness,
not real. So simplicity is not. There is density in life, and to get really the content, or frame this content in the important state that they want to say, they have to take out this density, which is reality. Reality is dense. Is not minimalistic. Is
particularly
and design, graphic design, and propaganda actually working in the opposite way. They want to take away everything which is
doesn't fit
with reality is made up, which is this density of waking up and have a lot of thoughts about where you're going, where I am. Where this is not really about design or graphic. It's about to sell you a product of an idea or whatever, but it's a simplification. It's based on simplification. That's why it's so interesting.
And that's why
it's
you
more
get passionate against
there's the
simplification.
sophistication in that. When you are under this influence, you're buying or you are believing in something, it's because somebody, the big programmer, is make this happen. It try to simplify to you to understand that you have to believe in this principle or in this idea or buy this or buy that. So that's the way graphic and propagandas are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you want a clear orientation,
Exactly.
you listen in that
Yeah,
direction. And
But
your task
life is
of
not
course,
about that. We all know that.
Exactly. And your
Yeah.
task, if I understand you
Yeah.
correctly, is to disorient people, to
Yeah.
uproot them,
Yeah.
to make them insecure, right? To make them uncertain about what seems to be self-evident.
Right.
The artist, in a sense, is the enemy of the American Constitution, which starts with the sentence, "We hold these truths to be self-evident."
Okay.
I mean, not to malign the American Constitution, it's a marvelous work of art, by the way.
Yeah.
But the assumption that there is something evident is obviously something you're trying to undermine.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, what a way of concluding it. Unless you have a particular question, I would give you a last chance. This is your last chance. Take it.
Yeah, I've got a question. Once you started painting like this one, is there the kind of result of what we see here already somewhere in your mind? Because there are so many things in the end that are really obvious, but there are so many layers behind things we could think that there are or there are not. Or,
Right.
And is this a process, and do you decide somewhere in this process now it's finished, or do you already know when it's?
Not always I know where it's gonna be in the end. There's a moment that I live this as a finished work.
But when you start?
When I start, I start to layer, but basically all my paintings are already. I make a sketch, which is visual, and computer or all the draw, and already have in mind all the elements that I want to use, and then I start I start to put all the first layers, and then the second and the third, and to get this density which I'm talking about. This and in one point it's finished when I decide that okay, now I'm just not doing something else because I see what I already imagined. So the question is, if I already see my paintings in my mind before, yes, I do. Yes, it's definitely planning. There's the only moments of, they say, of improvisation is just in the color itself, the way it's sprayed, the way I want the ways I want them to be. But there's no other place for improvisation. The main paintings itself is already planned, so it's an sketch, right.
Let me play devil's advocate for a moment. When you say at one point you decide it's done now, doesn't that contradict your assumption that it's a permanently open process?
It could be, yeah.
Is it an arbitrary
It happened to
decision?
me actually that there's something which I never say public. So it happened also that I take paintings that they are already in one point I declare ready, that I rework this again. So it happened very often that I still working a painting which is in one point I consider it done, and then I say well, and then I start again. So this.
Does it happen that you wake up in the middle of the night with a Goyak monster on your chest, right? And you say, no, it's not finished, I've got to continue.
Yeah, but finishing for me is a problem. I have to admit this. To finish a painting it's a difficult decision for me. It's not really something I.
Well, it's a difficult
and
decision.
sometimes I make a bad decision. So I declare paintings that I see in the gallery, and then I say, it's not finished. So, sometimes I even have a collector already, and I say, oh my God, he's just leaving. He has something which for me is not finished. No, there's no. But it happens very often in this.
We have the same problem now. We have difficulty to finish. We have to draw an arbitrary line, but I'm sure Juan will be happy to ask questions or to answer questions person to person, face to face. So thank you all for listening. Thank you for very lucid explanations.
Amazing.
And we look forward to a productive life and seeing you on a regular basis here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. It was really fantastic.